I notice the file has a name Nan in the notes. I'll treat that as a typo/placeholder and proceed. Checking names to avoid. Rebecca, Claire, Daniel, Sandra, Harlow, Owen, Marlene, Robert, Gallagher, Nadine, Walt, Patricia, Cassidy, Elise, Gerald, Marcus, Whitfield, Nora, Theo, Joel, Bertie, Kevin. The moment his mother set down a wine glass in front of everyone at the table except me, I understood exactly what kind of evening this was going to be. She didn't do it on purpose. That was the part I kept reminding myself. She simply walked around the table, her husband, her son, her sister who had stopped by. And when she got to me, she paused, smiled warmly, and said, "Oh, you can just use the water glass, sweetheart. We're not standing on ceremony here." Then she moved on. I smiled back and said, "Of course, thank you." And I meant it. I wasn't offended. Not yet, but I noticed. My boyfriend had warned me, gently, the way people warn you about weather when they secretly think you'll be fine. "They're old-fashioned," he said on the drive over. "My dad especially. Just don't take anything personally." I had nodded and looked out the window at the highway. I had been in enough rooms to know what old-fashioned usually meant. It meant there were rules about who deserved what, and those rules were invisible until you broke one you didn't know existed. I had been with him for almost 2 years, long enough to love him, long enough to have started thinking about what forever might actually look like. He knew I was a pilot. He knew I flew for a living. He just didn't know what kind. He thought I flew regional routes. Small planes, short hops, the kind of job that sounds impressive at first and then fades into the background when someone asks what you really do with your life. I had let him believe that, not because I was ashamed, not because I was hiding something, but because the moment you say, "I'm a captain at a major airline," the conversation stops being about you and starts being about the job. People want to know the salary. They want to know how you got there. They want to measure you against something, and then decide how to treat you based on where the measurement lands. I had spent years being measured. I was tired of it, so I kept the details simple. I fly planes. I'm gone sometimes. I like my job. All of it was true. None of it was complete. His parents lived about 40 minutes outside the city, in a neighborhood that had once been farmland and now had HOA regulations and a man-made pond. The house was large and well kept. His father had built a successful insurance business. His mother had run it with him for 30 years and recently retired. They were good people, his father had told me before we left. Hard workers. They believed in earning things. His aunt was already there when we arrived. She was the kind of woman who assessed you in the first 3 seconds and then spent the rest of the evening confirming what she'd already decided. She shook my hand and said, "So you're the girlfriend." Not a question. A categorization. "I am," I said pleasantly. "He says you work in aviation," she continued. "I do. Booking? Customer service?" I smiled. "I fly the planes." She blinked. Then she smiled too, in the way people smile when they think you've made a small joke. "How fun," she said, and moved on. Dinner was his mother's pot roast, which was genuinely excellent. The table conversation moved the way family conversations do, circling, overlapping, returning to the same familiar topics. His father talked about a golf trip he was planning. His aunt talked about her daughter's new house. His mother asked me, at one point, how long the drive from the city had taken. That was the extent of her interest in me for the first 20 minutes. Then his father turned to me. He had a way of doing it that felt like a meeting coming to order. "So," he said, "tell me about this flying job. What would you like to know? What airline?" I named it. He nodded slowly, recalibrating. It was one of the big ones. Everyone had heard of it. "And you're... what? A flight attendant?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm a captain." He smiled in the way people smile when they're not sure if you're exaggerating. "A captain, you mean you actually fly it?" "I do. I'm in the left seat." He looked at his son briefly, just a glance, half a second, and then back at me. "Huh," he said. "That must be nice." That was it. That was the entire response. Then he turned back to his son and asked about a work project he'd mentioned the week before. I ate my pot roast. I watched. I listened. His mother asked me later if I found the schedule difficult. All that travel. she said, with a kind of sympathetic tilt to her head. Do you think you'll want to keep doing it? After, when things change. I knew what when things change meant. It meant marriage, children, the natural winding down of a woman's ambitions in service of a life that mattered more. I love my job, I said. I'm not planning to stop. She nodded pleasantly. Of course, she said. It's just, at some point the schedule becomes harder to manage. For a family, I mean. She glanced at her son, then back at me. I'm sure you've thought about it. I have, I said. I think it's manageable. She smiled again, unconvinced. His aunt, who had been listening, leaned forward slightly. My neighbor's son just made captain at a regional carrier, she said. Early 30s. It's such an achievement for someone his age. It is, I agreed. Of course the majors are different, she continued vaguely, then changed the subject. I was 31 years old. I had been flying since I was 17. I had my ATP at 24, made first officer at 26, and earned my captain's seat at 29, one of the youngest in my class at the airline, and one of very few women. I had flown through weather that would have made most people weep. I had landed a wide-body aircraft with a hydraulic issue on a Tuesday afternoon, so routine it barely made the incident report. I had 300 passengers in my care every time I put on that uniform. None of that was in the room. None of it had been invited. After dinner, his father walked me to the living room. He asked how long the training had taken, the way people ask about hobbies, politely, with the assumption that there's a simple answer. I told him. He raised his eyebrows. Long time, he said. It is, I agreed. My son never mentioned you were. That it was so serious. I looked at him. He knew I was a pilot. Right, he said. Sure. He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him reorganizing something in his head. Not opening up. Just filing things differently. Well, good for you. Good for you. The words landed the way they always do, like a pat on the head from someone standing on a step above you. I smiled. I said, thank you. And I thought, this is the answer to the question I came here to find out. Not whether they would like me, I wasn't naive enough to need that answered in one evening, but how they treated someone they believed had nothing particular to offer, a girlfriend, a woman with a job involving planes, someone's +1 at a Sunday dinner. That answer was becoming very clear. On the drive back, my boyfriend was quiet for the first few miles. Then he said, I think that went well. I looked at him. Do you? He glanced over. My dad seemed interested. He seemed confused, I said, which is different. He frowned slightly. My mom likes you. Your mom asked me twice when I was planning to stop working. He was quiet again. Then, she's just traditional. She means well. I know she does, I said. And I did. That wasn't the part that was bothering me. What was bothering me was that he hadn't noticed. The wine glass, the smile that said how cute, the complete absence of any real curiosity about who I was before I became his girlfriend. He had been sitting at that table and hadn't seen any of it, or had seen it and decided it was normal enough to leave alone. I didn't say any of this. We drove the rest of the way mostly in silence, and I looked at the highway lights and thought about what I had learned. 3 days later, his mother called me. Not him. Me. I had given her my number at the end of dinner, the way you do, expecting to never hear from it again. I hope I'm not interrupting anything, she said. Not at all, I said. I was in the crew lounge at the airport waiting for a turnaround. What's on your mind? I just wanted to say I looked you up. A short pause. Online. I hope that's all right. I waited. I didn't realize, she said, and her voice had shifted. Careful now, more deliberate. I mean, I knew you flew, but I didn't understand what that meant. The training, the type ratings, all of it. Another pause. I feel like I was, perhaps. She stopped. Started again. I asked you some questions at dinner that I'm not sure were entirely appropriate. It's fine, I said. The schedule question, she stopped again. I was thinking about it in terms of what I knew, and I didn't know very much. I appreciated the honesty. I did, but I noticed something in my chest that wasn't quite relief. It was a smaller, flatter feeling. Because the reason she was calling was the same reason his father had reorganized his files at the living room table. Not because she had reconsidered her assumptions about women in general. Because she had looked me up. Because there was now data to reconsider. "Thank you for calling," I said, and meant it. "We'd love to have you again sometime," she said. "For dinner, a proper one. I'd love to hear more about your work." "I'd like that," I said. I hung up and sat with my coffee going cold and thought about the difference between being welcomed and being upgraded. The second dinner was different in the way that a rehearsal is different from an opening night. Everyone was performing something. His father asked careful questions about flight hours and route structures and asked if I'd ever flown into bad weather. The kind of questions people ask when they've done a little research and want you to know it. His aunt, who had also been invited again, no longer assumed I worked in customer service. She mentioned twice that her friend's daughter wanted to be a pilot. "Maybe you could talk to her sometime," she said. "You'd be an inspiration." I smiled. "Sure," I said. "Tell her to call me." But I noticed that I had a wine glass this time, a real one, the kind they kept for guests. His mother had put it out herself, and I watched her do it, the way she set it down precisely, and I understood that the gesture was genuine. She was trying. I didn't doubt that. What I doubted was whether the trying was about me. My boyfriend felt it too, this time. On the drive home, he said, "They're being weird." Just that, straightforwardly, which I appreciated. "A little," I said. "My dad looked you up too," he added. "He found some article. You were quoted in it, something about women in aviation. He printed it out." I turned to look at him. "He printed it." "Yeah." He paused. "I think he's trying." "I know he is." Another silence. Then he said, "Does it bother you?" I thought about it honestly. "Not in the way you mean," I said. "I'm not angry at them. I understand why they're doing it." "Then what?" I looked out the window. The way they treated me the first time, that was the true version, the real one. This version is the edited one, and you can't unknow which one came first. He was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't stand up for you," he said, "at the first dinner. The wine glass, the schedule questions. I saw it and I didn't say anything." I looked at him. "I should have," he said. That was the first real moment we'd had since all of this started. A week later, we had an argument. Not about his parents. About something small. Plans that got changed at the last minute, a miscommunication about a weekend trip. The kind of argument that isn't really about what it's about. At the center of it, eventually, he said something that stopped everything. "Sometimes I don't know where I fit," he said. "With you." I sat down on the couch. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, not dismissively, more like he was trying to find the right words and wasn't sure he had them. "You have this life. This thing you do that means something. And I'm a project manager at a mid-sized company. I manage timelines and vendor contracts and I'm good at it, but it's not." He stopped. "I don't know how to explain it." "You don't need to impress me," I said. "I know that," he said. "But sometimes I feel like I can't keep up, not with you, with what you represent to other people. And my family. And now every time they look at me, they're thinking, how did he end up with her?" I looked at him carefully. "Is that what you're thinking?" He was quiet. "Because I didn't fall in love with your job title," I said. "I fell in love with the fact that you remember how I take my coffee without asking. That you once drove 40 minutes to bring me soup when I was sick on a layover because you thought I sounded tired. That you listened to me actually talk, not just wait for your turn. That's what I have. That's what I chose." He looked at me, and something in his face shifted. "You chose me before you knew," he said quietly. "I chose you because of who you were before I knew anything else," I said. "But you need to decide if you can stand next to me without measuring yourself against me. Because I can't do this if the rank makes you feel small." He nodded slowly. He didn't say anything right away. But the fact that he nodded, really nodded, not the way people nod to end a conversation, but the way they do when something actually lands, that mattered. About 2 weeks after that, his father asked to meet me. Not for a family dinner, not with his wife present, just the two of us, at a breakfast place he liked near their neighborhood, the kind of place with real maple syrup and menus laminated so many times they'd started to yellow at the corners. He was already there when I arrived, hands around a coffee cup, no phone on the table. He stood up when I came in. That was new. We ordered and sat across from each other, and for a moment neither of us pretended that this was casual. "I owe you an honest conversation," he said. "Okay," I said. "The first dinner." He looked at his coffee. "I didn't take you seriously, and I'd like to think it was because I didn't know, but the truth is I didn't ask. I made an assumption and I didn't bother to check it." He lived up. "That's not about you. That's a habit I have." "I know," I said. He blinked slightly. "You do?" "People do it more than they realize," I said, "especially with women in jobs that aren't legible to them." He turned the word over. "Legible," he repeated. "If I had walked in and said I was an attorney, you'd have understood that immediately. It fits a shape you already have. Pilot doesn't fit the same shape, so you set it aside. It wasn't cruelty. It was just the faster route." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't like that about myself," he said. "The fact that you're here suggests otherwise," I said. He smiled faintly. "She's very patient with me," he said, and I knew he meant his wife. "She's been pointing out things like this for 40 years. I'm a slow learner." I smiled back, a real one this time. "My son is in love with you," he said. "That much is obvious. I just want to make sure. I want to make sure I'm not the reason he loses you." "That depends on him," I said. "Not on you." He nodded. "Fair enough." Then, after a pause, "What do you need from us, as a family?" The question surprised me, mostly because it was the right one. "Treat me the same whether you know what I do or not," I said. "That's all." He looked at me steadily. "I'm not sure I know how to do that yet." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for honesty." He nodded, and for the first time since I had walked into their house with a bottle of wine I hadn't needed to bring, I believed him. The months after that were ordinary in the best way. His parents came to the city twice. We had them over for dinner at the apartment. I made pasta, nothing impressive, and his mother ate 2 helpings and didn't mention my schedule once. His father asked to see a photo of the aircraft I flew. I showed him one from a trip to the Pacific Northwest where the light had been incredible. He looked at it for a long time and said, "That's your office." And the way he said it, like something had finally clicked into place, was worth more than any apology. His aunt remained who she was. Some people do. She still had the friend's daughter who wanted to be a pilot. I talked to the girl on the phone for an hour one afternoon. She was 22 and nervous and full of questions. That was worth something. My boyfriend. And by that winter, he was my fiancé, though we had decided that quietly, just between us, not as a performance, was still learning. So was I. There were evenings when I could see him calculating something, running the numbers on himself, and I had to remind him gently that I wasn't keeping score. There were mornings when he'd do something so simple and so careful that I'd think about the drive back from that first dinner, the highway lights, the question I was holding then about whether I had seen who he really was. I had. That was the thing. I had seen the man who stayed quiet at the table and let the assumptions land without challenging them. I had also seen the man who came to me 40 minutes later in the car and said, honestly, that he'd noticed and hadn't spoken. Most people don't do that. Most people revise the story until they're the good guy in it. He revised himself instead. That's who I chose. Not the title, not the salary that came with it, not the version of him his parents were proud of, the version that could look at his own silence and decide to be different. I think about the first dinner sometimes. Not with anger, not even with irony, just with clarity. The wine glass. The schedule question. The way I was handed a version of welcome that had conditions built into it, I wasn't even supposed to see. Those moments weren't the cruelest things anyone had ever done to me. They were just the truest. The unguarded version. The one that comes out before people know to perform something better. I've spent a long time in rooms where I was sized up before I spoke, Airline crews, air traffic control, passengers who looked at me walking into the cockpit and let their eyes say everything their mouths were too polite to. I've learned to notice and decide, not to punish, not to perform forgiveness either, just to look clearly and choose who I let into the life I've built. The real question from that first dinner was never whether they would like me. It was who they were when they thought I was nobody. That answer told me more about them, and more about what my future with their son would need to be built on, than any polished version of them ever could. And what I found, past all of it, past the awkward respect and the printed articles and the careful wine glasses, was something I hadn't expected. People can surprise you, not always, not without work. But sometimes, the version of someone that comes out when they stop performing is better than the first unguarded one. Sometimes, the slow learner learns. That's not the ending of the story. It's the beginning of a longer one. But it's the part that matters. If you've ever walked into a room and felt yourself become smaller based on what someone decided you were before you spoke, this one's for you. And if you've ever been on the other side, deciding someone's worth before you knew anything real about them, that part is for you too. We've all done it. The question is, what you do when you catch yourself. I've thought about that first dinner more times than I can count. Not the big moments, the wine glass, the good for you, the way his father reorganized his assumptions in real time right in front of me. I've thought mostly about the small things, the way his mother tilted her head when she asked about my schedule, the pause before his aunt said how fun, the comfortable silence his father returned to once he had filed me somewhere that made sense to him. None of those people were cruel. I want to be clear about that, because the easy version of this story makes them the villains and me the quiet hero who held her cards until the right moment. That's not what happened. What happened was ordinary. They met someone they knew nothing about and filled in the blanks with what was familiar. That's just what people do. The problem isn't the assumption. The problem is what you do when the assumption turns out to be wrong. His father looked me up. His mother called to apologize. Both of those things required something. Not a grand gesture, just the small, uncomfortable work of reconsidering. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people double down instead, find reasons the original assessment was correct, reframe the new information until it fits the story they already had. These people didn't do that. They sat with the discomfort and then did something about it. That's rarer than it sounds. And my boyfriend, the man I eventually said yes to, the one who came to my door with 2 coffees because he didn't know what I drink anymore and didn't want to assume, he had to do something harder. He had to look at his own silence at that dinner table and decide it wasn't who he wanted to be. Not because I demanded it, because he saw it himself and it bothered him. The willingness to be bothered by your own behavior, to actually sit with that and not excuse it away, that's a kind of integrity that doesn't come from being smart or successful or impressive. It comes from paying attention and caring what the answer is. I think about what I was really testing that night, walking in with a bottle of wine and no title on display. I thought I was testing them. I was also testing myself. I was finding out whether I could be in a room where no one knew what I'd done and still feel like the same person. Whether my sense of who I was depended on whether someone else recognized it. It turned out it didn't. Not entirely. But it also turned out that being seen matters. Not because validation is the point, but because the way someone treats you when you have nothing to prove tells you something true about what they actually believe about people. What I know now, after all of it, is this. The choices we make when no one is watching us, when the person in front of us has no obvious power, no title, no visible reason to be treated with particular care. Those are the choices that reveal actual character. The rest is performance. The rest is managing impressions. Actual character shows up in the small moments, the wine glass, the offhand question, the silence when someone deserved a word. And character also shows up in what happens next. Whether you look at yourself honestly, whether you try. That's what I came home with. Not a victory, not a score settled, just clarity about what I need the people in my life to be capable of, and evidence that the ones I chose were capable of it when it counted.